Hi, I'm Gayla. After 20 years of climbing the corporate ladder, I took the leap and started my own business to pursue my dream of creating a work-from-anywhere lifestyle. Having the freedom to work from practically anywhere is such a cool feeling. You're in the right place if you're looking for ideas and inspiration to start and grow your own online business. Every week in this podcast, you'll receive practical ideas, hints, tips, and tricks to help you grow your online business where you can leverage your time and you can accomplish more. You too can experience wonderful adventure and freedom as you live life on your own terms. Hi there and welcome. I'm glad you're here with me today for episode number 96. If you've been listening over the past few weeks, I thought I'd do something special for episode 100 that's coming up, and that's only in 4 weeks. Yikes! I'm going to announce next week a special giveaway for the 100th episode. And if you want to get a jump on being entered into this special giveaway, even though I haven't announced what it is yet, all you have to do is to subscribe in iTunes. Leave a nice little comment, share an episode on your favorite social network, and be sure to tag me. And then just drop me an email at podcast@gaylascrivener.com with a quick message simply saying, subscribe, comment, and share done. That's it. You're entered. Oh, and you know what? The more times that you share an episode on social, the more times your name will be in the hat for the drawing. Yeah. That's right. I'll announce what the giveaway is actually going to be next week. Then the winner will be announced on February 26th. Well, in today's show, I've asked Jennifer Filla, owner of Aspire Research Group and Prospect Research Institute, to join me. In 2007, Jen took the leap, as she puts it, right into the middle of the pool from her corporate job in which she felt stifled into creating a business and a career for herself to fit a lifestyle where she could travel, work remotely, and have the freedom of being more in control of her time. I've learned so much from Jen over the years that I've known her. With every conversation I have with her, I learn something new. I get better insight, better perspective, and clarity. And today's interview is without exception. I know you'll enjoy the conversation just as much as I did as Jen shares her experience and her journey in leaving the traditional 9-to-5 in lieu of pursuing a business of her very own where she could and does work from anywhere in the world and enjoys the freedom of control over her time. Well, without further ado, let's dive right into my conversation with Jennifer Filla. Hey there, Jen. Welcome. I am so glad you're here.
Thanks so much for having me today.
Well, can you believe that it's been 2 years since you've been on my podcast?
Wow.
2 years. Way back when I first started the podcast, you joined me on episode number 16 to talk about building and managing a virtual team. That was pretty cool, and I loved that conversation. But I'm so glad that you joined me today. I think this time we should talk more about your business, what got you started.
For podcast number 96.
Yes. Isn't that amazing? I'm almost to 100.
That's wild. That is wild.
Well, first off, just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your businesses.
Sure. Yeah, I started way back in 2007 and I branched out. I decided to become a consultant, but really all I wanted to do was the work I was doing. I just wanted to do it for myself, and I founded Aspire Research Group. I did a year first as a sole proprietor, and then I decided to incorporate and get serious about it. And the business Aspire Research Group, I help nonprofit fundraisers when they're concerned about things like finding the best donor prospects, or they get worried about what size gift to ask for, or just generally helping them when they want to do better at reaching their major gift fundraising goals. A lot of that work involves profiling. So researching an individual, a company, or a foundation to find a good match. And I love doing that work. I just absolutely adore it. I'm fascinated by it. So I thought, hey, I'm going to do this on my own. And now it's 12 years later, and I actually started a second company, Prospect Research Institute, in 2014 because I love to teach, I love to present, and I thought there's nothing out there for people to really learn. There's no courses where you get homework and you get to really prove you can do the skill. So I started that in 2014, online on demand courses. And that has been challenging, but also fun. Like, I love creating that content. It's amazing what you learn when you have to teach someone else how to do it. So I really love doing those two businesses. Prior to that, I had a career as a legal secretary while I was raising my daughter. And once she went off to college, that was my opportunity to do something different. So that's when I got started.
So you went from legal secretary to prospect research?
I did. I did.
How did you even know? I never heard of such a niche until I met you. How did you even know what to do and how to help folks?
I didn't.
Yeah.
So I got my degree at night. So I had my daughter when I was young, and I went to college at night for like 9 years. So I was 30 years old when I received my bachelor's degree.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I was really an executive secretary at a life insurance firm. But my whole time prior to that had been like in the general counsel's office and worked at various law firms. I did things like the corporate counsel work, which is, keeping the corporate books. So I knew all about public companies. I knew about SEC, Securities and Exchange Company filings, which had just gone digital at that time. I mean, this was early 2000s. I got my degree and I said, geez, if I don't change careers now, then I might as well just be a secretary forever, because HR departments, they look at your past and say that's what you should do in the future. So I did. I examined all kinds of industries and ended up answering an ad in the newspaper way back when there were only newspaper ads. And I became I forget what my title was, but I ran the Passport to History program at the Delaware County Historical Society. So I took a nonprofit job. And in that position, I had to do everything. And I discovered a lot about what I'm good at and what maybe I'm not so good at. So when I moved over to the Devereaux Foundation and they opened a prospect research position, it was all the lights went on, like, oh, wow, this is a perfect match. I had all that, where do you find public information experience through the legal? And I had some fundraising experience now working in the nonprofit field. And that was just a great mix. And then, I was winging it. By that time, the internet was full swing, and I was reading and talking to others and just figuring it out as I went along.
So is that industry a fairly new type of niche, or has it been around because of the internet? It's just becoming more aware.
If you think about market research, it's very similar. So we're trying to find prospects who would most likely want to give a gift to an organization or to a specific project at that organization. And in market research, you're trying to find your best customers. And similarly, information technology with the explosion of data has really accelerated and broadened the fields. So even in prospect research, we now have 3 areas of specialization if you work for a very large organization. And that's prospect research, that profile research. There's fundraising analytics, where you're doing a lot of statistical modeling and data mining. And then now there's prospect management, where you're helping create the system of people and computers to make sure that you efficiently ask people for money. So yeah, it's exploded. It's always been there, but it was quiet and it was go to the library stuff.
You're researchers, so you found your niche. I know this of you. You love databases and you love the data and you love analyzing that and being able to find clients that aren't great at that or don't know how to get the data that that is great. You find your perfect match in clients. Do all nonprofits know that they need a prospect researcher?
No. The big companies like Donor Search and iWave, they're called data aggregators, and you purchase a subscription and you can search for public information. they make it easy to search. They've done a great job of educating the market about what prospect research is, that you can find information. It's interesting, in the nonprofit world, the key is the relationship, especially asking someone to stretch and make a large investment in a nonprofit organization. So what I look for is sophistication in building relationships. If they understand how to do that well, and then there comes a pressure, maybe they need to raise a large amount of money, a campaign over a period of time because they're, busting out of their building, or they have a high demand. Once that pressure happens and they're good at relationship building, or they hire someone to help them with relationship building, then they typically know they need research. Their consultant might tell them, they might realize we're doing things the way we always were, but now we need to raise more money. What's missing? We're not sure we're talking to the right people. And then they come to me.
Now, you had said you went from legal secretary to nonprofit to what was the other job that you had that got you started, that it's like a light shone on you? It's like prospect research. Awesome.
So I started at the Devereaux Foundation, and they're a national nonprofit,
Mhm.
behavioral and mental health care. And they have facilities around the US. At that time, they had 12 of them. And I actually started there as a legal secretary for the general counsel. And their national headquarters had, their national fundraising staff right in the same building, on the same floor. I got to know everybody, they got to know me. And when my boss, the general counsel, moved into planned giving, they created a position for that. Then they opened up and decided they needed some prospect research. And that was just like, I was in the right place at the right time with the right people and the right tools. So it was just a really wonderful launch to my prospect research career.
So that opened up the doors for knowing kind of your calling of what you do best and where you shine. How long after that you had gotten experience in that job that you started Aspire Research Group?
That's a great question. It really wasn't that long of a time. And I think people were sort of suspicious of me at first in the field, thinking I hadn't done my time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because most people don't go consulting until they're in their 50s
Mm-hmm.
after the end of a career. It was probably between 5 and 8 years, I want to say. Actually, let's take that back. It was about 3 or 4 years after I started at Devereaux that I went out on my own. After Devereaux, I took some positions where I was the frontline fundraiser. So I did corporate and foundation relations, and then I did major gifts, where I was actually asking people and stewarding people who were making major gifts. I just ended up with this well-rounded experience. And the Devereaux Foundation, because it was national and because we went right into a wealth screening, really gave me a deep education on how California is different from Arizona, which is different from Florida, which is different from Texas. So I had this big picture perspective right away. And I absolutely love that. So I was lucky, was looking around, and I wanted to do some travel. No one telecommuted at that time, which I found frustrating. Found it frustrating that I was boxed into a 9 to 5, regardless of how hard I worked. And I'm a self-disciplined, productive person. So all of that kind of packaged up into, why don't I give this a try on my own?
I was going to ask what tipped the scale, but it sounds like the travel and then feeling cooped up in a cubie, and being restrained by geography.
And rigidity, just in general.
Mm-hmm.
I love the big picture. I like to take risks. When you work for a larger organization, especially, they're very risk averse. So I wasn't fitting in. It wasn't bringing out the best in me. I was frustrated. So when the time came where my daughter went off to college, that kind of thing, I had options that I didn't have before. So I decided to jump in.
Did you jump in with both feet and just quit and then started your consulting, or did you work on trying to get a client or two first before leaving the day job?
I jumped into the center of the pool.
Me too.
I was done working, and I don't recommend that for everyone. And
Me neither.
it's not always the best route. Yeah, I did everything you're not supposed to do, but I did get a client on my first day on my own. And it happened by accident, happy accident. I had volunteered to be part of a panel at a local Association of Fundraising Professionals meeting. It was about grants research, which I was an expert in. From that, I had the opportunity to say yes, and I'm going to be starting on my own, blah, blah. And someone in the audience came up to me and she said, you really should talk to my boss, the vice president. So I reached out to her. I scheduled an appointment with her on my first day on my own and landed the contract. So I got lucky. But
Awesome.
it also showed me, how do you get a client? That's a great way to get a client.
Yeah. That is awesome. I found what you said a little bit earlier interesting. Of the perception is that you kind of have to be in an industry or be old to get into consulting.
Right.
And it's not true. We can have this vast amount of an experience and perspective in a short amount of time, because when we're good at something, it doesn't matter what our age is, but we do have some obstacles of and age is one of them. We're either too young or too old. Nothing just perfect, but just sticking our neck out there and just proving ourselves, I think, is important.
Well, I think now people are starting to recognize that, and certainly in the future, you don't just have one career anymore. And adults bring a lot of experience to their work. I had, over a decade of legal secretary experience at various different kinds of firms doing different kind of law. I mean, that very deep research experience. And I brought that with me into this new career. So if you think of it that way, it's not like I started and 5 years later hung a shingle. I had been working for a
Mm-hmm.
long time before then. And I was a little green around the gills, but I didn't start off with the kind of clients I have now either. I started off doing different types of work and have moved into more complex consulting.
You've already told us the first thing that you did when starting out was you participated in a panel. You had an opportunity in talking with a VP and you landed your first client, which doesn't always happen that way. So that is awesome. But what other firsts did you do when starting out? I mean, how did you get your name out there? Were you worried about a website right off the bat, or what was your number one most concerns when you were first starting out?
Yeah, well, sometimes getting that first client on day one is a bad thing because it's easy to stop marketing. You know,
Mm,
I got my client, I'm busy, I'm just going to do the work and not worry about the next clients. I happen to enjoy, at that time, HTML coding. So I created my website and I kept working on that, maybe because a lot of my work is online. So, I started my favorite link directory page at that time, and that has continued to drive a lot of traffic to my website. I also, in 2008, started a newsletter, an email newsletter, which was relatively new for when, 2008. And I love writing, always have. Part of the strengths of a researcher are frequently that writing skill, the technical skills like the HTML coding. So I was doing those things. I'm not sure that was the best way to get clients at the time. I was shy about speaking, but I ended up starting to do that in 2008 when I moved down to Florida from Philadelphia. So while I was getting better at speaking and things, I had already started a newsletter. And once I made that into a blog on my website, it really drove a lot of traffic and has been a tremendous source of success in years later. So like I didn't know I was doing the right things.
You started your newsletter way at the very beginning in 2007. That's when things were kind of at their infancy of internet marketing. And you've been consistent every year with that newsletter since 2007, 2008.
2008, yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing that I have learned from you is that consistency of that core piece of content. And then you layer more things into it, but you've never strayed from that first piece of consistency.
Yeah, I've built a following. People have told me that they have been reading my blog for, years they've been following me.
How does that
And
make you feel?
really weird. One of the things about researchers is they're shy. So we're aware of how public information is. I rarely get comments on my blog posts. So at first I thought, well, nobody's reading this. Why am I doing this? I wasn't sure that I was smart enough to write something, all those kinds of things. And I did it anyway because I didn't have a lot of work in the beginning. And even when I did, I had read about being consistent. So I learned a few things about developing content. I didn't have to know everything. I could interview other people and learn. So I did a lot of that too. But I went with my strengths, even though, in hindsight, I can see that. I didn't realize that then. I did a number of years later look at how other consultant firms worked, like how other individuals who were consultants got business. And there were some different models. I'm glad that I went with the sort of driving traffic online because it felt more comfortable to me. It kept me alive in terms of revenue until I learned how to get clients different ways.
Well, I love that you said that you rarely get comments, yet you kept going and didn't give up because you thought, well, nobody's listening, so I'm just going to stop. Sometimes there's just no way of knowing. And I love that you kept going despite feeling like, nobody's listening.
It's the writer in me. I like doing it, so I kept doing it.
I think that's important, but I find that interesting. All your writing is building a relationship, and that's what your prospect research is doing, is researching the data for the perfect prospect for giving to a nonprofit. And it's that market research and getting to know somebody to build a relationship for better fundraising. So it seems to make sense that your marketing is building relationships with nonprofits so that you can help them. But then now since 2014, you've transitioned to build a relationship with other prospect researchers to teach them the way. There's not a lot of classes out there. There's not a degree program on how to be a prospect research until Prospect Research Institute came along.
Well, it's so interesting because on the one hand, when I started writing the blog, I did a lot of like how to, because that's, what I was focused on, doing the work. And I got a lot of people calling me who had no money to pay me. They were really early stage nonprofits, and that wasn't a good fit. So I had to change what I was writing about. So I learned how to think about my audience differently. And I did online research at that time to figure that out. When I started the Institute, I did phone interviews with people to figure that out a little better. And that made all the difference. Understanding or paying attention to the results of your marketing are important too. And it can be anecdotal. It doesn't have to be based on data. People often don't show up in the data or things about people.
What do you know now with your experience of being a solopreneur that you wish you knew way back then?
Well, I think there's probably two things going on in my mind when you ask that question. The one, when I started out as a consultant, I wish I had focused on a niche. So what I mean by that, I felt like prospect research was a niche. Like there was hardly anyone else out there doing that as a consultant. So that was enough, but it wasn't. If I had focused, for example, on arts organizations and really gotten into what arts organizations need and what they're like in the world they live in, it would have been a much faster growth for me than focusing on the entire nonprofit sector. On the other hand, if I had not focused on the entire nonprofit sector, the Prospect Research Institute would not be a possibility in the way that it is now, because I can train and touch on all sizes and shapes of nonprofits. But the other thing I think back on and laugh at myself is that the joke was really on me. I chose to hang a shingle and be a consultant because I loved doing research. And I didn't really like that frontline fundraiser experience where I was interacting with the donor and asking the donor for gifts and thanking the donor in person. But I had to find clients. And as I learned years into it, I really needed to have those skills where I was meeting with prospects and talking to them and then stewarding clients and having all those situations that bring me such discomfort. So I had to learn how to be good at that. If I had known about those two things early on, well, heck, I'm not sure I would have started, which maybe isn't a good thing, but I certainly could have grown a lot faster.
I hear you. I picked owning a virtual assistant company because I thought, hey, I could be behind the scenes all the time. No, not researching. You can be behind the scenes all the time. Not.
No,
Uh,
yeah, joke's on us.
yes, yes, it is. In your line of work, you've kind of grown up with carving out your own remote office, and you and your husband do travel. You go in spurts and maybe spend a month or two in Berlin or somewhere overseas, which I find really cool. And you just become a part of the culture and rent a flat and everything. What do you need to consider when you're traveling and working?
Well, it changes. I, I have found that when I started traveling like that, especially in Europe or abroad outside the US, the internet didn't used to have walls. It didn't have country borders, and it does now. So things have radically changed from when I first started. And I'm not single anymore. I have an employee. And so that has changed how I view all of that. One thing I learned was whether I had an employee or contractors helping me, everything needed to be stored in the cloud because I couldn't risk my laptop dying or getting lost. And I needed to share information securely because donor information is confidential. So we now use Dropbox as our provider, and it allows me to control the information. If I am no longer using a contractor or that relationship is severed, I can remotely delete those files off their computer and they don't have access to the data anymore. So that has been super important. I've also had my laptop die. And because I had everything stored in the cloud, it was very easy to work. I also had a remote backup in the cloud backup, so I could it was amazing. I just bought a computer and presto, I was working again. What's come up now, especially, is password sharing and antivirus. So I realized, that you have to look for the weakest link. So I can have antivirus software, I can have my router secured, et cetera, my internet connection secured. But if my employee doesn't, then everything's at risk. So we went to an enterprise solution and we used LastPass. Thank you, Gayla, for the recommendation for password sharing. And antivirus, I did some research and I chose F-Secure. So I have an administrator panel, again, where I can control the information. We also use a VPN so that if I'm traveling and I'm working somewhere that I don't have a secure router, I can disappear. The same for my employee. If she's working in a coffee shop, she needs to be secure. And interestingly, people might not think of this, but when I'm in Europe and I'm trying to research or access US websites, because of the new general data protection regulations in the European Union, many US websites have blocked access from a foreign server. So I discovered this to my surprise when I was in Amsterdam. I'm like, why is this attorney website not pulling up? Well, they don't want to have to comply with the regulations, so they shut it down. So using a VPN didn't just protect me generally from snoopers, but I was then able to access these US websites. So it's you just have to be flexible and keep looking for solutions. It's a lot of time to take out of a business day, but it's super critical to staying in business.
Now, do you have to change your schedule, or you try to keep with a normal work type schedule, even if you're overseas in different time zones and things like that?
That's a good question. I shorten my day when I'm in Europe. So I'm 6 hours ahead, 5 or 6 hours typically, of the US. And it works really well. So I'm available maybe until 1 p.m. Eastern time. And then I put that in all my email signature lines, etc. And I haven't had too much of a problem with that. I just learn once I arrive somewhere, I learn a balance for the day. Like I do like routines. I might discover, well, when I was in Amsterdam, the routine was to get up early and work, and the US was sleeping, so I could be very productive and deliver all my work early. And then I would take a break around lunchtime, and my husband and I could go exploring the city while the US was just waking up, which is typically quiet. And then when the US was, awake in the afternoon and talking to me, then I could be back and do some meetings and things in the evening in Amsterdam. So I try to find a balance. I think the hardest thing for me is, even when I'm in the US, is knowing what time it is for everyone else that I'm working with and keeping that straight. That's tricky.
Well, yeah, in the US, we only have, what, 4 time zones to contend with? You have worldwide followers, which is really cool because you can help prospect research niches, Australia and Canada and Europe and everything like that. So how has opening your business to be worldwide versus just US, how's that affected you?
Well, I was really surprised when that started to happen with the Institute, where we were attracting students from Mexico and Australia, and the time zones really are an issue there. In the US, if you schedule a webinar, for example, around the middle of the day, you're going to catch all the time zones. But if you have UK and Australia on a phone call, like, that's impossible. So we only this year am I actively engaging with our non-US audience just to explore. I really don't know what they want or what they're looking for. And so when I thought about hosting some focus groups, I did have to think, I need to do this more than once and at very different times of the day so that people are able to attend. That was tricky. Had to really think through that. But most people, like, we had a student from Australia participate in an analytics course early on, and she was so highly motivated. She was up at 6 a.m. and perky. So I think early adopters are easier to deal with. But if I want to work with this audience ongoing, I'm going to need to really listen to them.
Well, what has been your biggest challenge that you faced in growing your business?
The biggest challenge I've had is confidence. And maybe that sounds funny, but early on, had very little confidence. I was worried that I didn't know how to research well enough. I was worried that I was charging too much. I didn't have confidence about anything. And so I would offer, oh, try a free profile. Or if someone pressured me, sure, if you give me a lot of business, I'll discount it. And I had to learn not to do those things. I think the confidence, there's no magic wand for that. I mean, it was just over time and pushing through my discomfort and learning and growing over the years, I've gained confidence. But that was a big obstacle for me, really big. I don't think I could have grown any faster in the business because of that. If I'd started with confidence, it would have been a whole different story, but I had to gain that through the experience.
Through the experience. I hear you. I draw confidence from folks like you, Jen, when we talk and I learn from you, and I have a select few people, a circle of folks that give me that confidence that I need to keep on going and growing. Do you have a group of folks like that? Have you received coaching?
I did. I knew I was struggling with sales, and I just didn't know what to do. I,
Hmm.
and I wasn't sure where to look. So I started looking for different trainings and stuff. Because I traveled so much, I didn't have a group of people doing what I did locally to me. So I had researchers, and I had clients, but I didn't, have other business owners to talk to. And I took a training and I spent a lot of money on it. For a year, I did Sandler sales training. And I think that was the big shift. I know it was. It was life changing, personally and professionally. And it taught me about people. And sales is about people. And I had a lot of social skills I needed to learn. And that's probably from, naturally wanting to be behind the scenes. I had not practiced some of those skills. So that made a huge difference. After that, I felt like it felt like torture during, but after it, I felt like I could do anything.
Yeah, I think that there is something that really shifts, that the light bulb goes off and we just need to practice what we learn, even if it's uncomfortable. The marketing part, so many of us struggle with that.
Yeah, for me, I wish I had reached out sooner to find other business owners. I did have a great network of, and do, that I've built locally here, other nonprofit consultants. So once I expanded from like what I do, research, to all nonprofit consultants, and we have a strong connector person here in Tampa that started that. And that made a big difference too, because I connected with one or two other people who were growing their businesses. And we were all sort of in tandem there. They have different businesses, they do different things, but it was just that sharing and camaraderie, like, oh, well, what kind of software are you using to solve that problem?
Mm-hmm.
And how are you growing your business? Like, are you using contractors? Are you going to go employee? What does that mean? Do you have a lawyer? Do you have an accountant? It was really, really helpful once I started that or found that here. But it took me a long time.
What has been your biggest reward?
I have really loved freedom over my time. It was the whole reason I really wanted to do this. I wanted to be rewarded for my hard work, and I wanted the flexibility. So, for example, I get sick frequently if I'm run down. And one of the struggles with work was they wanted me to like be in the office. And so I would end up like struggling to figure out how to keep myself healthy. I would go out to my car and take a nap. And then the one place, my daughter was a teenager at the time, and then they started to get rigid about the times. And because of the way the traffic worked, I wasn't able to have dinner with her at home. And all those, it just seems so stupid to me. Now I can take a nap in the day if I'm tired. I can work later. If I write best on the weekend, I'll take 3 hours on a Saturday morning and go to the coffee shop and get the most amazing things written, and then take time on Thursday afternoon to pick up my grandkids. Like it brings me so much joy. I'm healthier, I'm happier. I just absolutely love the freedom of my time.
That is a great reward. Do you mind sharing one of your favorite resources or books that's really made a difference for you?
Sure. I looked on my bookshelf before talking to you.
Mm.
I have a lot of great books. And I was trying to figure out, well, what would I say would be a good book to read? And I think the only reason I chose the Sandler sales training for that year and coaching was because I got the book out of the library. It was You Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bike at a Seminar by David Sandler. And once I got the book, and there was another book, Sandler Sales has a ton of books. I started to read them at home, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's me. I do that. And it was really eye opening. So that was a very relatable moment. There's so much good information in there about how to do sales. So that was a key book for me. And I think everyone needs to find that book that relates to you. I mean, maybe it wouldn't be for everybody, but that was a big change for me.
Now that's available out on Amazon, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I
I'll
didn't want
put,
to purchase it. I wasn't willing to spend the money
ah,
until I knew it was something, because
yeah,
there's so much out there. It's hard
yeah.
to trust.
Well, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to that book. I'm curious about it now. I'm going to have to pick it up and read it.
It's worth a read.
Good deal. Well, any last minute advice that you'd give to anyone who is thinking about starting their own remote work or their own business, or that they've started out and they're trying to grow? Any pieces of advice?
I think the biggest piece of advice I can give is not to decide for your customers what they want. And by that, I mean when you are talking to people to discover if they want to buy what you have to sell, whatever it is, don't pre-fill it for them. Just ask the open-ended question. And the example I have is when I wanted to start the Institute, I had a preconceived notion. I wanted to create a certificate program. And what I discovered was nobody wanted that at that time. And I asked an open-ended question. I said, what's the best research training you've ever had? If you could dream up your favorite training, what would it be? And then I asked them what they actually spent money on. What was the most money you ever spent on a training? And what was that training? So I didn't say, hey, I have this great certificate program idea. Would you buy it? Because who knows whether they really would. They might say anything. So you might be surprised at what your customers want. It might be a very different format or shape than what you had originally thought. Doesn't mean your idea is bad. You just need to change it for what they will actually buy.
Very good piece of information. That's the validation part of what you have to offer will actually fly.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's the format of the delivery.
Yes.
So I want to teach you about automobiles because I feel like women, in conversations, they frequently want to know more about their autos. They don't want to feel stupid when they go to get it fixed. But I want to deliver it to you as a presentation at a meeting, and you really want to consume it via a magazine. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
There's often you really have something valuable to sell, but if you try to push it on them in a format that they don't want it, or that's not how they could consume it best, you may feel like you've lost, and you can't sell, and it's a dud. But it's not. It's just you haven't figured out how they want to consume the info.
Well, Jen, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule and being on today's show. And could you let our listeners know how they can find you?
Probably the easiest way to find me is jenniferfilla.com.
Yep. I love that you have a personal brand, jenniferfilla.com website. You also have your Aspire Research Group and Prospect Research Institute websites. Real quick, early on, how long have you had your personal brand? Did you do that immediately?
No, it was my brother's idea. He has his own marketing company,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted him to do branding for me for the new company, Prospect Research Institute. And like the first words out of his mouth were, get a professional picture, and I think you should have your own personal website. So
I think that it took me several years before I started my personal website, but it gives you that much more freedom for people to get to know you, and there's more sides to us than the company that we represent, I guess. And it gives us a chance to shift and expand, I think.
it does. It means that I could sell either one of the businesses and still have a spot
A spot in
somewhere.
this world. Yeah, we build businesses so that we can earn a living, and what would be cool is if we can sell it and make a profit. I mean,
Yeah. Or retire or
or
both.
retire. Yes. Awesome. Thanks again, Jen, for being with me.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
What was your biggest takeaway from listening to Jen's experience? Mine was how similar we are in taking the calculated risk of leaving a traditional 9-to-5. We both waited until our daughters went off to college, and we both jumped in with both feet right in the middle of the pool. One day we had a day job, and the next we were out on our own. Although neither one of us recommend this route because in hindsight, we see that there could have been an easier path, but we both enjoy helping others learn from our experience. Links to all the resources mentioned in the conversation and Jen's contact info are in the show notes for your quick reference. Now, one thing that seemed to be missing for both of us when we were starting out was the access to a resource or a group to bounce ideas off of, to be in a place with other peers that were kind of in the same place in their business as well, to learn how to navigate the waters of creating an online business. Now, if you're thinking about taking the leap and leaving your 9-to-5 and want to start something on your own, or have started but are struggling or frustrated and wavering with your confidence, I'd like to invite you to my 6-week masterclass that starts February 4th. Just like Jen mentioned, the biggest challenge in growing her business was confidence. You gain confidence through experience. Yes, and you also gain confidence through learning about the experience of others and getting help to push through what's uncomfortable to gain your experience and to gain that confidence. All you have to do is just go to gaylascrivener.com/masterclass to learn more about this masterclass that I'm offering. Now, if you are listening to this podcast way after February 4th, that's okay. Go over to gaylascrivener.com/masterclass and be put on a waiting list. If you're listening to this and you sign up for this February 4th start date for the masterclass, if you sign up, you will be one of the charter members. And as a charter member, you get a few more perks. So again, go to gaylascrivener.com/masterclass to learn more. Well, thanks for joining me. And until next time, I hope you have a fantastic week.